You know how people love to say, "It's just business, don't take it personally"? That's what they said right before trying to destroy my career. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. My name's Natalie Pierce, and I was the lead software engineer at a mid-size AI tech startup in Seattle called Loophole. We weren't Google or Apple, but we were doing something groundbreaking, building an automation system that could cut down logistics costs for Fortune 500 companies by 40%. That meant billions in potential savings. I'd built almost every line of the code myself. It was my baby, my brainchild. The company's CTO, Mark, loved to take credit for our innovation, but everyone knew it was me and my team doing the heavy lifting. By the time our prototype was ready for testing, investors were circling. We were scheduled to do a live demo for venture capitalists and a private equity group on Monday morning. If it went well, Loophole would close a $200 million round, and we'd all get bonuses, promotions, the usual Silicon Valley fairy tale. At least, that's what I thought, until that elevator ride. It was Friday evening. The office was nearly empty. I was staying late to fix some last-minute UI bugs before the demo. My headphones were off, my laptop was running a build, and I decided to grab coffee from the lobby cafe. When the elevator doors opened, Mark, the CTO, and Ethan, the CEO's son, stepped in behind me, still talking, assuming I couldn't hear over the music in my earbuds. "Fire her department for that lumbo the second they finish the new code," Ethan said casually. "Yeah," Mark replied with a smirk. "We'll just have HR handle it Monday. Her team's expensive anyway. We'll claim budget cuts after the investors sign." I froze. My hand tightened around the coffee cup. I didn't even breathe. They were planning to fire my entire department, the people who had built the entire system, right after we made them rich. For a car. For a damn Lamborghini. And the worst part? They were so sure I wouldn't find out. When the elevator doors opened, I stayed still for half a second, pretending to scroll my phone. My heart was pounding, but my brain was clear. That moment, that exact second, something in me shifted. I decided right there I wasn't going to play defense. I was going to make sure that when they pulled the trigger, the gun pointed right back at them. I went back to my desk, closed my laptop, and opened a new file on my secondary drive, one I'd set up months ago for experimental versions of our system. I started writing new code. Something leaner, smarter, but most importantly, legally mine. See, 6 months earlier, I'd taken a certification course in intellectual property law. Not because I planned to use it, but because I was tired of seeing engineers get exploited. That course turned out to be my secret weapon. I knew our contract with the company was vague about ownership of preliminary development work, and it had a dangerous gap. Any independent modification or derivative system designed outside company time wasn't considered company property. So I did exactly that. I stayed up the whole weekend building what I called Loomax, my version of the same system, using my original framework but with key rewrites that made it legally distinct. I didn't need to steal their system. I just needed to outbuild it and make sure the law recognized it as mine. By Sunday night, my fingers were blistered from typing. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours, surviving on caffeine and fury. But I had it. A cleaner, faster, legally independent version of everything they thought they owned. When Monday morning came, I put on my sharpest blazer, tied my hair back, and smiled in the mirror. They had no idea the kind of week they were about to have. The investor demo was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. The whole boardroom was glowing. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, screens everywhere. Cameras were set up to record the event. As the team gathered, Mark strutted in like a hero, bragging about his system. Ethan stood beside him, wearing his father's arrogance like a second skin. The CEO, Mr. Langston, looked proud. I was silent.
Calm.
My code was ready. Just before the demo started, the company lawyer, David, walked in, holding a thick folder. He looked pale. I didn't think much of it until he leaned over to Mark and whispered something. Mark laughed. David didn't. Then, as the investors began settling in, David raised his voice, his tone trembling. Fees revert to $50,000 per hour, per developer. The room fell silent. The CEO's father, the actual chairman, dropped his coffee. And then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Oh my God." That was the moment they realized they didn't own me or my system. I did. And that's where my revenge really began. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Every executive, every investor, every developer, they all froze. The CTO, Mark, blinked in confusion, glancing at the lawyer like he'd misheard. "What do you mean 50,000 per hour?" he asked, half laughing, half nervous. David, the company lawyer, adjusted his glasses and swallowed. "The clause in your updated MSA, Master Service Agreement, was modified when the derivative work was logged under an independent entity. It means that all further usage or presentation of the code requires payment to the primary developer at that rate." For a second, no one understood. But I did. Because I wrote that clause. 3 months earlier, I had quietly consulted with a friend, an IP attorney named Rachel Nguyen. She'd helped me structure the Lumax entity, an LLC registered under my own name. I'd documented every late-night commit, timestamped and backed up on independent servers. And most importantly, I'd added a single, subtle line to the metadata of every rewritten module. Derivative framework developed under Lumax Technologies LLC, all rights reserved. That one line changed ownership. Legally. Now, standing in that boardroom, watching the CTO and the CEO's son scramble, it felt like time slowed down. Ethan leaned forward, his voice rising. "That can't be right. We paid for everything." David shook his head. "You paid for Lumax's development. This," he lifted the contract, "is for Lumax. That's a separate entity." I stayed silent. My pulse was steady, my face calm. Inside, I was shaking from adrenaline. The investors, sensing chaos, began murmuring. One of them, an older man in a sharp gray suit, spoke up. "So, to be clear, the system you're demoing right now isn't owned by Lumax?" David hesitated. "Correct." And just like that, the entire tone of the room shifted. The CEO's smile evaporated. He turned to Mark, voice icy. "You told me all IP was internal. What is this?" Mark stammered. We thought it was." They didn't. They just never read the fine print. After the demo imploded, chaos spread through the office like wildfire. The investors delayed their commitment, pending clarification. The CEO canceled every meeting, lawyers flooded the building, and my inbox started filling up with urgent requests to discuss code access. I ignored them. Instead, I sat back and watched from my cubicle as panic rippled through the executive floor. You could always tell when someone's empire was cracking, their tone changed. People who used to bark orders started whispering. People who ignored me suddenly remembered my name. Mark tried to call me into his office that afternoon. "Natalie," he said, forcing a smile, "we're all just a bit confused right now. Maybe you could clarify a few things about your code." I looked him dead in the eye. "My company's code." He froze. "What?" I folded my arms. "Lumax Technologies LLC. That's who holds the derivative rights to the framework. You signed the document authorizing the test integration, remember?" Mark's jaw tightened. "You tricked us." "No," I said softly. "You ignored the woman who built your empire." He slammed his hand on the desk. "You'll never get away with this." I smiled. I already did. That night, I packed my things quietly. My team messaged me, panicked. "Are we fired? What's going on?" I told them the truth. Not yet. And maybe not ever. Because here's what they didn't know. When I'd registered Lumax, I'd included every one of my developers as contractual contributors. If Lumax wanted to use our system now, they'd have to pay all of us directly. The next morning, headlines hit the local business press. Lumax faces IP ownership dispute days before $200 million deal. The investors started backing out. Stock dropped 17% in a day. By Wednesday, the CEO called for an emergency meeting. They brought in their corporate lawyers, 5 of them this time. Ethan wasn't smirking anymore. The CEO's father, Mr. Langston Sr., looked at me across the long glass table. "Natalie," he said calmly, "we want to resolve this amicably. Surely you don't want to damage the company you helped build. I smiled faintly. I don't. I just want what's fair. He leaned back. And what's fair to you? I slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were copies of the contracts, IP registration certificates, and the clause with my lawyer's signature. A licensing agreement, I said. $50,000 an hour per developer for all system use, or a buyout of full ownership for $12.5 million. The room erupted in disbelief. Mark nearly shouted, $12.5 million? For code you wrote on company time? I tilted my head. Actually, on my own time. That's what the metadata and Slack logs prove. David, their lawyer, looked through the pages. She's right. The CEO's face strained of color. He muttered something under his breath, then stood up abruptly and stormed out. Mr. Langston Sr. stayed quiet, eyes fixed on me. He wasn't angry, he looked impressed. You played them, he said finally. You played all of them. I just smiled. I learned from the best. When I left the building that day, I didn't even look back. It was raining lightly, Seattle's usual gray drizzle painting the sidewalk silver. I put my earbuds in, turned on some soft jazz, and walked to my car. I'd spent years being underestimated. Years of people saying I was too cautious, too quiet, too predictable. Now they finally understood. I wasn't just a coder. I was the architect. And I'd just rewritten the rules. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails from corporate lawyers, calls from unknown numbers, messages from old colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. Everyone wanted to talk. But I wasn't naive. I knew what was coming. When you corner powerful people, they don't beg, they strike. Around 10 a.m., my lawyer Rachel called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension behind it. Natalie, brace yourself. They've filed an emergency injunction to freeze your assets and prevent you from distributing or licensing the Lumax code. I exhaled slowly, staring out the window. So it begins. She continued, we'll fight it, but they're trying to paint you as someone who stole intellectual property from your employer. A bitter laugh escaped me. The employer who planned to fire me the moment I finished their code? Rachel didn't answer, but I could almost hear her smirking. Exactly. But remember, we've got proof. Timestamps, commit logs, Slack messages, your personal server IPs. We'll win this. Still, you should expect them to go for your reputation first. And she was right. Within hours, a tech blog ran a story. Disgruntled engineer holds company code hostage for millions. They called me vindictive, unethical, unhinged. They quoted anonymous insiders who claimed I'd gone rogue after a failed promotion. None of it was true, but truth doesn't trend. The comments were brutal. People I'd trained, mentored, and supported were now posting vague tweets about betrayal and professional integrity. I wanted to reply, to scream my side of the story. But Rachel's advice echoed in my mind. Never argue with the mob. Prove them wrong in court, not online. So, I went silent. And I worked. For 2 weeks, LumaEdge waged war. They filed lawsuits, leaked stories, tried to lock me out of every shared system I'd ever touched. They even sent a letter threatening to sue any investor who partnered with Lumax Technologies. But every move they made only proved one thing. They were scared. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for respect. That's when I made my next move. I uploaded a video, just 3 minutes long, titled, The Truth About Lumax. No dramatic music, no fancy editing. Just me, sitting in front of my desk, speaking calmly to the camera. 3 months ago, I discovered that my department was going to be terminated after delivering a system I designed. I didn't react with anger. I reacted with preparation. I built something better and legally I own it. Every claim I make here is backed by timestamps, signed contracts, and federal filings. This isn't revenge. It's accountability. I ended the video with a quiet smile. They taught me that business is about power. So, I learned how to take mine back. The clip exploded overnight. Tech forums, women in STEM pages, even mainstream outlets picked it up. The same blogs that called me vindictive now called me brilliant. Public sentiment shifted almost instantly. Now, LumaEdge wasn't the victim. They were the villain. A week later, their injunction was denied. Rachel and I sat in court as the judge read the decision aloud. Lumax Technologies, owned by Natalie Carter, retains independent intellectual property rights. The plaintiff's motion to freeze assets is denied. Mark and Ethan were in the front row. They looked like ghosts. As we left the courtroom, cameras flashed. Someone shouted my name. For the first time, I didn't shy away. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman who had ever been silenced in a meeting, every engineer whose name was erased from a patent, every creator told their ideas belonged to someone else. That evening, I got an email from Mr. Langston Sr., the CEO's father. Subject line, "Private conversation?" I hesitated before opening it. "Natalie," he wrote, "you've proven your intelligence and your value. But this war will only drain both sides. I'd like to propose a deal, one that gives you freedom and then peace." I forwarded it to Rachel. Her reply came back fast. "He's not your enemy.
He's a businessman.
If he's reaching out privately, it means they're desperate. Let's hear him out, but on our terms." 2 days later, I met Mr. Langston Sr. in a quiet downtown cafe. He arrived alone, no lawyers, no assistants, just a tired old man with a weathered briefcase. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," he said, sipping black coffee. "You saw a trap before it closed, and you built your way out." I stayed cautious. "You didn't call me here to compliment me." He smiled faintly.
"No.
"I called you here because my son and his CTO have made a mess. They were arrogant. And you, well, you've exposed it. But tell me honestly, Natalie, what do you want?" I looked him dead in the eye.
Control.
"Of my work, of my future." He nodded slowly. "Then let's give you that, in a way that makes everyone whole." I leaned forward. "I'm listening." By the time I left that cafe, the storm outside had eased. I didn't have a deal yet, but I had something better. A sense that, for once, the power dynamic had flipped. LumaEdge might still be bigger, louder, and richer than me. But now, every step they took, they had to check my shadow first. Because I wasn't their employee anymore. I was their competition. And I was just getting started. The next week moved like a chess game, silent, strategic, every move deliberate. Mr. Langston Sr. arranged a closed-door meeting at LumaEdge headquarters. No PR team, no assistants, no leaks. Just me, Rachel, and their executive board. Walking into that building again was surreal. The glass walls still gleamed. The same receptionist smiled politely, not realizing that this time, I wasn't there as an employee, I was the threat they whispered about in the elevators. We entered the boardroom. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. At the far end sat Ethan, the CEO's son, and Mark, the smug CTO who once laughed about my department's fate. Now they looked nervous. Mr. Langston Sr. greeted me warmly, pulling out a chair. "Natalie, thank you for coming. I think it's time we all found a way forward." Rachel placed her briefcase on the table, snapping it open with purpose. "We're listening." Ethan started first, his voice too smooth to be genuine. "Natalie, let's be clear, this isn't about animosity. We all made mistakes. You went your own way, we miscommunicated, and now the market's confused. Investors are skittish. We're offering to buy out your company, full acquisition, for $8 million in cash." He smiled like it was a mercy. I looked at him, expressionless. $8 million. For something they tried to steal from me. Rachel didn't even flinch. "You're offering less than the annual R&D budget she managed alone last year." Mark cut in, voice sharp. "We could also fight this in court again. You'll bleed legal fees for years. We both know you can't outspend us." I leaned back in my chair and smiled faintly. "You're right. I can outspend you. But I don't need to." They frowned, confused. I slid a small folder across the table. Inside was a single printed document, sealed with a lawyer's stamp. Mr. Langston Sr. looked curious. "What's this?" Rachel answered for me. "A notice of assignment and licensing rights, filed last week with the U.S. Patent Office." Every time your existing LumiEdge product communicates with the Lumax protocol, every API call, every data sync, it triggers a licensing clause. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What clause? Rachel smirked. The one that bills you $50,000 per developer per hour. The room fell silent. Mr. Langston Sr. blinked. That's impossible. Rachel turned to him. Not at all. It's legal, enforceable, and already signed. Here's the signature. She pointed to the bottom of the page. Ethan's face drained of color. That's my signature. Rachel tilted her head. Indeed. You signed it during the partnership paperwork 2 months ago, the very document that your assistant recycled from Natalie's original draft. You never read the fine print. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You tricked us. I finally spoke, my voice calm but sharp. No, Mark. I protected myself. You were planning to fire me and take everything I built. I simply ensured you'd have to pay for what you stole. Mr. Langston Sr. sat back slowly, processing every word. He wasn't angry, he looked impressed. You used their greed against them. I learned from the best, I said quietly. The tension in the room was electric. Ethan's mask cracked. You can't hold us hostage like this. We'll take this public, expose you. Rachel closed her briefcase. By all means. The public loves Natalie. You just confirmed that your CEO's son signed a multi-million-dollar liability without reading it. Ethan turned red, his jaw tight. Finally, Mr. Langston Sr. raised a hand. Enough. Both of you. He turned to me. Natalie, you've made your point. You're owed respect and a fair outcome. What do you really want? I took a breath. I want ownership of my work, full control of Lumax, and a joint licensing agreement where you can continue to use the system, but under my terms. You pay for what you use. Fairly. He nodded slowly. And in return? In return, I'll grant your company non-exclusive access to my new architecture, the one your investors are already asking about. Ethan glared. You can't be serious, Dad. But his father silenced him. She's more serious than you ever were. The deal was struck right there. LumaEdge would pay a licensing fee for every use of Lumax's framework, effectively turning my revenge into a permanent income stream. But I wasn't done. As we finalized the paperwork, I looked at Ethan and Mark one last time. You know, I said softly, you taught me a lot about power. You made me understand that knowledge means nothing without leverage. I owe you for that lesson. Mark looked away. Ethan muttered something under his breath. I stood, gathering my bag. Next time you laugh about firing someone, make sure they're not the one holding your legal throat. Rachel smiled proudly beside me as we walked out. Behind us, silence, the sound of egos collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. Outside, the afternoon sunlight hit the glass of the building I once helped build from the ground up. It used to represent their empire. Now it represented my victory. Rachel turned to me. You realize you just made history, right? I laughed softly. No. I just made things right. We walked toward the parking lot, passing the company logo gleaming on the wall, LumaEdge. Soon, that name would mean something very different. Because starting next month, every product they released would proudly display a quiet little line at the bottom of their licensing page.
Powered by LumaX Technologies trademarkteken.
My company. My code. My revenge. A month later, my life felt unrecognizable. Lumax Technologies wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Within weeks of the settlement, 3 major investors approached me directly. They didn't see a rogue engineer or a disgruntled employee. They saw a visionary who had outsmarted an entire corporate board and reshaped the rules of ownership in tech. Every headline told the same story. The woman who outsmarted her CEO. Engineer turns corporate betrayal into a multi-million-dollar win. How Natalie Carter redefined power in Silicon Valley. Each time I saw my name in print, I felt a mix of pride and disbelief. For years, I'd poured my heart into companies that treated me as replaceable, a cog in a machine. Now I was the machine they couldn't run without. But what satisfied me most wasn't the money or the fame. It was the control. The sense that, for once, I wasn't reacting to the system. I was designing it. One rainy Thursday morning, I was working late in my new office. Glass walls, soft lighting, the quiet hum of creativity all around me. My small team of developers, the same ones Lumiedge had planned to fire, were building something extraordinary. We'd built a new AI platform that used code optimization techniques years ahead of anything in the market. And every single one of them owned equity. No one here would ever be discarded for someone else's bonus car. I looked around at them, focused, free, fulfilled, and smiled. This, I thought, is what revenge done right looks like. Later that afternoon, an email notification appeared on my screen. From m.langston@lumiedge.com. Subject: Congratulations. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity won. Natalie, I fought your decisions, I underestimated you, and I paid the price. I'm not writing to apologize. I'm writing to say you taught me something about accountability. We'll be renewing the Lumax license next quarter. Mark. I chuckled. It wasn't quite remorse, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. Ethan, on the other hand, had resigned under personal stress. Rumor was, he tried to blame the fiasco on his father, but the board didn't buy it. He vanished from the public eye entirely. And Mr. Langston Sr.? He sent me a handwritten letter. You didn't destroy my company, Natalie. You saved it by forcing it to evolve. I hope you keep building. I framed that letter and hung it in my office. Not because I admired him, but because it reminded me that sometimes even your enemies can recognize your worth once you've proven it. The following week, I gave a keynote at a tech ethics conference. The room was packed, investors, founders, journalists, and hundreds of young women in the crowd. I began with a story. A while ago, someone told me, "You're just a developer. You'll be replaced the second your code ships." And for a while, I believed it, until I realized my value isn't what I deliver. It's what I build that they can't control. There was quiet at first, then thunderous applause. I continued, revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means reclaiming what was yours all along. After the speech, people lined up to meet me, some for mentorship, others just to say thank you. One young woman, probably 20, said shyly, "I watched your story unfold online. It made me believe I could start my own thing, too." I smiled and told her, "Then I've already won." That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, overlooking the city lights. The world below buzzed with movement, deals being made, deadlines being chased, dreams being built and broken. And I realized something profound. What began as revenge had become rebirth. I hadn't just punished those who underestimated me. I had freed myself from needing their approval at all. My old world had been about survival. My new one was about creation. I opened my laptop and began typing, a new idea forming. Something that could change the way startups protected their intellectual property forever. A soft smile crossed my face as I whispered to myself. They thought firing me would save them money. Turns out, it cost them their future. Weeks later, the first quarterly royalty payment hit my account from Lumiedge, 7 figures. Rachel called me, laughing. "Feels poetic, doesn't it?" "Every dollar," I said, "is a reminder." "Of what?" she asked. "That revenge isn't about rage. It's about writing the ending yourself." She laughed. "Then I'd say you've mastered the art." The sun was setting outside my office window, casting gold across the glass walls. My team was still working late, their laughter echoing softly in the background. And I thought back to that elevator, the moment I first overheard them plotting to fire us all. That one instant of betrayal had rewritten my life. But I didn't just survive it. I owned it. I turned their arrogance into my empire. And every time someone used the software they tried to steal, the system itself whispered the truth in fine print, a truth that would outlast them all. Copyright Lumax Technologies, built by the woman they tried to replace.